We're now recording.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice at the City University of New York. These monthly breakfasts are co-sponsored by the Association of Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. This morning is our 273rd breakfast. I started these after 9/11. We met in person at John Jay until March 2020. Since April 2020, we have been meeting virtually. All of these breakfast recordings are posted on the websites of both ACR-GMY and the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center. At the moment, the ACR-GMY website is an easier one to access since we've still been constructing ours, www.acrgmy.org. These sessions are made possible each month by a wonderful team of colleagues that I'm a part of. That includes Matthew Latimer, Nikki Borofsky, Emily Skinner, Chloe Choi, our newest addition, I'm not going to get this right, Thurston Pugh, and I've been a part of them since the beginning. Each month, we are so delighted to have our wonderful colleagues joining us. In fact, we have many former presenters on the breakfast session each month. This month, we have individuals who've been with us in the past as presenters. So we're really so excited to have you back again. Tzofnat Peleg-Baker and Michael Lang, two of the leaders of the field who've been working on reflective practice initiatives. To more formally introduce them, I am going to turn it over to Nikki Borofsky, who will lead us into their discussion. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you so much, Maria. And today's 273rd monthly Roundtable breakfast is an example of what some of us were speaking about in the pre-session, the collaboration and the partnerships that are born from these kinds of coming together and sharing resources. We are very excited today to have a very dynamic duo of conflict resolution luminaries speaking with us. I'm going to just briefly review a slice of each of our speakers' backgrounds, and I really encourage you to explore their contributions and scholarship in more depth. And there will be links that we're sharing and opportunities to delve deeper. So Michael Lang brings over 40 years of experience in mediating family, workplace, and organizational disputes. He is a respected expert in conflict resolution, having designed and presented mediation and conflict management courses throughout the United States and internationally, including being a pioneer and having created one of the first graduate programs in conflict resolution in the US at Antioch University all the way back in 1992. Michael's commitment to mediator excellence is evident through his extensive facilitation of online reflective practice groups and his co-directorship of the Reflective Practice Institute International with Suzanne Terry. And stay tuned for an opportunity with both of them coming up. He is the author of many influential works, such as The Practitioner's Guide to Reflective Practice in Conflict Having Resolution, and is a recipient of the John Hayes Distinguished Mediator Award from ACR. Now turning to Tzofnat, Dr. Tzofnat Peleg-Baker is a multidisciplinary applied social psychologist, and she brings a wealth of experience in sustainable dialogue forms of relating. With more than 20 years of global practice, she integrates practical, reflective tools rooted in behavioral science research into her transformative relational approach. Tzofnat's work spans from teaching courses on dialogue, conflict management, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, to leading transformative processes and facilitating reflective peer learning groups. More on that as well to come. Her significant contributions include having led intergroup dialogues in the Middle East and training and coaching government officials in Africa. As the head of strategy in the Israeli Ministry of Justice, she played a central role in introducing ADR and restorative justice across a very diverse array of fields. At present, she's leading transformative processes, facilitating monthly reflective peer learning groups, and teaching third-party interveners and dialogue professionals practicing globally in collaboration with international nonprofit organizations. Both of our speakers today have a massive experience and practice and are quite active. They are prolific trainers and authors, including a recent joint article in Conflict Resolution Quarterly that discusses the rationale behind applying reflective practice to the structured reflective instrument that they're going to discuss today. So we are very privileged to learn from Michael and Tzofnat's insights on how reflective practice can enhance expertise and improve outcomes. And I'm going to hand the mic over where they will not only challenge us to be better, but hopefully they'll provide us with some concrete tools and methodologies to help us do so. So thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming Michael Lang and Tzofnat Peleg-Baker to the virtual stage. Take it away.
Ships over the war in Gaza. The terrorist group says it fired missiles on the Barbados.
Are we ready,
Hold
Tzofnat?
on.
Yeah.
We are ready. I will be muting down everybody else
Okay.
Thanks, Nikki. Nikki, that was a brilliant introduction. Just not just the content, but the way in which you organize and present it. It's lyrical, almost poetic. Thank you. While Tzofnat is organized, are you ready, Tzofnat?
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you all, Maria and the team, Nikki and Emily and Chloe and Kirsten. I hope I pronounced it right. And Alice, she's not here, but we all corresponded and coordinated. So thank you so much for inviting us. Before we want to get to know you a little better, Michael, do you want to open with something?
Sure. I think Tzofnat and I have been talking about a couple of announcements that we might make. And I think, Tzofnat, we'll wait till the end. We'll leave ourselves enough time to do that,
Sure.
I think.
Sure.
Yeah. When we want to begin, really, by asking you a question and wonder if you would think about this. So, and I saw Jess Kent in the chat ask people to describe their favorite reflective practice. Now it was a curious question. I'm really interested. I'd love to know what prompted that, Jess. At some point, maybe you'll join in a little bit later and help us with that. There's so many ways in which people talk about, think about, and really try to assume that they are participating in what I know to be reflective practice. And so we thought one of the ways to begin would be to ask all of you, how do you participate? What does reflective practice mean to you? What do you do that you would consider to be reflective practice? And if you don't engage in reflective practice, what do you do when you come up against a puzzling practice situation? Something that's surprising, that is confusing. It could be something that occurs that is, in fact, my introduction to reflective practice arose out of something that was surprisingly wonderful and positive that I couldn't for the life of me understand why it had happened that way. So it isn't just that we look at the frustrating, annoying, difficult, and perplexing situations in that respect. We also look at the surprising ones with respect to reflective practice. So when you encounter something that is an incident in your practice, and what do you do? How do you deal with it? And you can answer, think about it first, and maybe answer in the chat. Tzofnat and I will be looking at the chat and seeing what your thoughts are.
And just very short, association or how you practice reflective practice, just so that we know, what you're thinking and your approach to it. Okay, debrief.
I like the idea of forgiving myself in advance, Martha. But let me just say, Martha, in response to that, that from our point of view, yes, some of these are situations where we end up with bruised behinds from kicking ourselves, and we feel as though we haven't been at our best. We could have done better. There's no question about that, and there is definitely room for both the self criticism and the celebration when things go well. And so it's great to do those. And what else do we do in order to learn from the experience? So I love the idea about forgiving myself in advance because I have a piece that is here in my office that was made by one of my sons who's an artist, and it's a collage piece that's just made, he calls it part of his ransom note series because it's just made out of cut up letters from newspapers and magazines, the way we see in the films, that ransom notes are prepared. And it is a piece of a quote from Samuel Beckett. And the full quote is, "Ever tried, ever failed? Try again, fail again, fail better." So forgiving ourselves in advance is a fascinating idea. I haven't heard that one before. Thank you. So
So we have learning opportunity. Some people said investigation, debrief, pray. Did I get it right? What else do we have here? Reflect on a process. All right. Well, it's good to see where you're coming from.
Yes.
About this topic. And as we progress with our presentation, I think you'll be able to see where we are coming from and what makes us different in how we see reflective practice. We do have many, many slides, but we are going to avoid delving into research and all the tiny little details, because we would like to hear more from you and dedicate the time for questions and conversation. But we will go through like the rationale of what brought us to this topic and what informs our different approach. So let's share my PowerPoint.
Yeah, I think while you're doing that, Tzofnat, yeah, please go ahead. I'll just say something further. Two things I want to say in advance that we will emphasize. One, everything that we're talking about isn't just made up out of whole cloth. There is a wealth of support for this in both research and theory. How we have adapted the ideas, the particular ways in which we choose to engage in reflective practice is unique. But we want to say it does have strong conceptual foundation. Secondly, we're going to be talking about distinctions and differences and not making comparisons to suggest that one method is the right way for everyone and that other methods aren't. But what we want to do is emphasize the value of reflective practice, what it really does, why I have spent almost 40 years now reading, thinking about, teaching about, and practicing reflective practice. So,
shall we?
Please.
All right. So what we're going to do today is we open about reflection, how we see it, what is it for us, where it came from. Then we'll move on to the structured reflective instrument and what brought us to me to design it, what research informs the SRI and the principles. And then we'll try out something. We won't have time to try it all, but we'll give you the exercise to take home. We'll start here, and then we'll move on to questions and closing. Okay, you see all right? Everything is okay? You hear me? You see it? Great. Okay.
One thing I will just say is, although we're leaving a substantial period of time at the end for questions, you may have questions in the meantime. Nikki has kindly agreed to monitor those. And if there's something that's really pressing, she'll let us know. Otherwise, we will hold those questions to the end. But I would encourage you to capture them as we go through the conversation, so that you'll be able to remember them, and we'll engage with you at the end. Thanks.
Okay, so as you can see, we start with questions. We actually continue with questions too. So the next question is, what do you think, and really shortly in the chat, the difference between experience and expertise? Just, 1 word, 2 words, not too long. If you can share with us what you're thinking. Integration. Oops. Top-down, hierarchical experience about expertise. Years, okay, it's the number of years that makes a difference. Not capturing everything, but experience is effectiveness, not just repetition. Expertise. Match past efforts.
Experiences, you see the one, experience is raw, expertise is refined.
Okay, great. More ideas? Expertise comes with a lot of experience. All right. Yeah, that's just good to start with. So let me start, revealing what we found and what we rely on after reviewing so much research about this topic. So first of all, experience is built on repetition. We repeat the same, most of the times, the same thing over and over again, because we are creatures of habits. That's what we do, not only in our profession. And literature on expertise, which I reviewed very carefully, it started in the 70s with knowledge, focus on knowledge, and you probably heard of the 10,000 hours or 10 years and so forth, but it progressed to the approach of expert superior performance. And this is what we take with us, we rely on it, and it takes more than repeatedly implementing facts and concepts that are learned formally. So one thing, we need intention to improve, in order to improve, we need to, and to attain the highest level of performance, we need to have intention. It's like a way of being, I see it. And cognitive processing, problem solving, anticipatory thinking, and also humility, valuing the help of somebody else or of a group in order to continually improve. If we rely only on experience, we risk a repetition, overconfidence, complacency. We stop growing in most of the times, and there's no improvement. So the conclusion here is that experience is valuable, but it's insufficient. Also, different domains, different areas require different hours. It's not only the 10 years or 10,000. It really depends what we're talking about. So I just want to show you how, it's really a choice in our life. It's either we decide, we go to a school, we get training, and then we mostly operate on our own, right? And we get to a stability, like a stable average level of performance, whereas we can choose to continually grow. Okay, that's the second option. And then we can continue improve and reaching the highest levels of professional mastery. Of course, reflective practice reflects the second option. So how can we attain superior performance? We are all about that. What do we do to reach those highest levels that it's never-ending story, because we keep improving and growing. So Michael will start first.
Okay. All right. I collect stories. I love to hear them. I love to tell them, as my children and friends would tell you, sometimes with a groan, as, oh gosh, Dad, not another one. But I'm particularly drawn to stories that have a relationship to, in this case, reflective practice, but that really don't seem to have anything to do with it. It's not about our field, as you can see from the wooden blocks. The story is one I'm excerpting and a bit from a book called The Reflective Practitioner by a man named Donald Shun. The first book I ever read in 1985 or early 86 on reflective practice that was one of those eye-opening experiences for me. Just a crystalline moment that I can remember picking up and reading this book. So the story is about an experiment that he describes in the book. And the experiment is one with 8 or 9-year-old children. They are in a room and they're given typical wooden blocks that we all as children have probably played with or at least have seen. Pardon me. And the children were given I'm sorry, the children were given a single instruction: build towers as tall as you possibly can. And they set off to do it with glee and silliness and whatever else. They built towers 8, 10, 12 blocks high until, trying to put the next one up, the tower began to teeter a little bit. The researchers cleared all those blocks away and brought in a new set of blocks with the same instruction: build towers as tall as they could. But very quickly, the children became frustrated. Whereas before they could build towers of 8 or 10, now there's 3, 4, 5 at the most. And they were really frustrated and confused. And one by one, they began to examine the blocks because they looked identical. But in fact, they weren't. In appearance, they were. But the researchers had planted weights in different parts of the blocks. And so as the children tried to build the blocks, they were assuming, their theory was, the blocks are uniform. And they had to revise their theory because the blocks weren't uniform, they were unique. And they had to test each block in their hands before they put it on the tower to make sure that the tower would be stable. And this is a simple story, and it is a perfect story to indicate what it is that reflective practice is about. We go on in our practices. We do extraordinarily good work. We continue to do the same thing over and over because it has been those techniques and strategies and interventions, methods, styles, whatever you would call them, they've been successful. So why not continue them? And then we come up against a surprising situation, and it isn't the same. And what we used to do no longer is working. And what do? In some instances, people just push back and sort of push on and don't think. But the reflective practitioner takes time to engage with the surprising moment, learn from the experience, make appropriate adjustments. And by learning, two things happen. One, the reflective practitioner figures out how to solve this unique dilemma. But what's also happening is that they're simultaneously gaining confidence in their capacity to address other surprising moments that occur. Okay, we can move on, Tzofnat. Thanks. So here's a definition, not really a definition, but it's a description. And there are two things about this slide I want to mention. The first, I particularly chose this image because reflective practice is a process of spiral learning. And that is that each incident, each time we learn something, we grow, our knowledge base grows, our experience base grows, we become more adept and resourceful and effective in our work. And the spiral keeps expanding outward and upward. My first inspiration for this, some of you may remember the childhood toy Slinky. That was one of my favorites. And I had this idea that this is how learning actually happens. When we are open to it, when we have a mindset and an openness to learning, it occurs in a spiral and expand. And people who are not open to new learning, their image would look like a record, just flat, going round and round. A mediator, Mandy Malabiti from Zakynthos, Greece, wrote me this in a private communication, and I thought it was so wonderful, and I asked for permission to use it because reflective practice does two things. It really affects our mindset, the quality of who we are as practitioners, at the same time as having extremely important pragmatic effects on resolving particular problems. So thanks, Tzofnat, we can go on. So we asked you earlier a little bit, what do you do when you have a puzzling practice situation? How do you respond? And some of you said, well, I forgive myself in advance. I love that one. Others of you said that you talk with a colleague or you think about the situation, you reflect. Some person, I think, if I read it correctly as the chat went by quickly, had something to do with a spiritual connection and perhaps prayer as a way of understanding what was going on and responding to it. And at the heart of the work that we do in reflective practice is begin with a puzzling practice moment. Just like the children, their puzzling moment was when they discovered that they couldn't build the towers as tall as they used to be able to. Okay, we can move on. So if not, thanks. So this is a simple way of distinguishing what people call reflective practice, but is probably really reflection. And it is a different activity. So reflective practice, we are analytical in the sense that we ask the questions, well, why did this happen? Not just look at what occurred, but what were the antecedents? What were the behaviors that led to it? What did I, as the intervener, contribute to the situation? Whereas in reflection, what generally happens is it's like watching a video recording of the event. We stand back, we are objective. We look at it and we think, oh, I see what's happening there. I see what's happening here. I have some idea about that. Oh, I'll never do that one again. Or that was a pretty good maneuver. I like that. For us, we want to be looking at it from the subjective point of view, and that is we place ourselves into the puzzling situation. We don't just look at it clinically from the outside, but we examine it because what we're examining are our reactions to what has occurred in three respects. One, our thinking. What did I think about what was going on? Our feeling. Did I have any kind of an emotional reaction, and what was that, and how does that affect me? And third, strategic. What are the strategies that I'm thinking of? What are the plans that I have? Also, in our work, we begin with the practice dilemma, the puzzling moment, and the question that prompts. And then we engage in a structured process, systemically, to critically examine what has happened in order to learn from the experience, as I said, both to solve the particular dilemma, but to enhance our capacity for being able to respond to similar dilemmas in the future. And with reflection, these are wonderful experiences we often have. They happen at conferences, they happen at other professional events. We grab somebody, let's have a cup of coffee. I want to tell you about a case I had. And we have a wonderful conversation. And we build a strong collegial connection that way. And we might laugh about the situation, and we might learn something, and we might share opinions about that. It's often informal and casual. And what I want to say about this is that what often happens here is that when we do reflection, if we're searching for advice from somebody else, if we're listening to suggestions or recommendations, we're not recognizing that that each of us is a unique people. We have separate brains. All of us, there are 100 and some of us in this gathering right now, and we might look at the same practice situation, the same circumstance, and out of the 100 of us, we would probably have 30 or 40 different impressions of what's going on. Why? Not because one is right and others are wrong, but because we're unique human beings. We bring a whole host of our background, our experience, our knowledge to bear in examining. So if I offer somebody an answer to a dilemma, it might be a very interesting answer, but it might be utterly irrelevant because I'm not that person. Okay. Very briefly, I just want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, that there are both the intrinsic as well as the extrinsic benefits of reflective practice. We often focus on, when we talk about it and when people are interested in reflective practice, in the extrinsic side. You know, I got a problem, I want a solution, I don't want to do this again. This was irritating, this was wonderful. How do I either do this again because it worked really well, or how do I never do this again and do something different because it didn't? But as I mentioned, there is the intrinsic reward that comes from engaging in reflective practice, and that is increased self-confidence. Because I think about it as both building competence and building confidence. We have a sense of accomplishment when we take a problem that we've experienced and we work through to a solution. We're happy for the solution, but the process is also an important thing we can take credit for and feel good about. Okay, Tzofnat, thank you. We can move on. So in our work, and the process that we use is called reflective debrief. That's the name that we have given to it. It's what Susan Terry and I have developed over several decades. And when we engage in a conversation called a reflective debrief, it starts with the person who's got the puzzling moment. They decide what the puzzling moment is, what the question is they want to have answered. And as I mentioned before, we don't tell, because there's a huge value in self-discovery, which is exactly the same. It mirrors what we mean by self-determination. So we use questions. We don't use statements, and we definitely don't offer advice, opinions. We use questions to encourage self-examination, self-assessment, self-discovery. We don't reassure somebody, oh, that was a tough situation, or your work was brilliant, because that's not what they need in that moment. At another time, yes. But in this moment, what they need is to stay focused on the problem that they're struggling with. And so at the very end, after they've gone through all of the reflective process, there are moments when somebody has said, I'm really pretty clear now what happened, why it occurred, what I need to do, but I'd like to hear some other suggestions. And then we will. But we wait until, it's rare that this happens, and we wait until the end. Okay. And this is our basic model of reflective debrief. We start by asking for a description. What's the context? We ask them, the person, to recall what was thinking, feeling, and planning. You can read these, and it works in this way. Generally speaking, yes, we follow this pattern. However, it's very often that somebody gets to a later stage and we have to go back. So it isn't a rigid, first we do this, next we do this, and next we do this. These are all of the elements that, taken together, lead to a successful conclusion of the debrief. We also don't see it as a straight line. In other words, as soon as somebody has reached the place of saying, yes, I know what I'm going to do, I know how to act, the next thing is that they act, and they're now engaged in a further process of discovery. And the learning continues in a constant spiral of growth and evolution. Thanks, Tzofnat.
You were muted.
Unmute yourself.
We can't hear you, Tzofnat. You're muted.
There we
Am I
go.
okay now?
Yes.
I had a hard time to unmute myself. Strange. Thank you for your patience. So let's see how what we do complement one another, and actually bring together a distinctive approach. So I'll start with something that is familiar to all of you. It comes up. Here we go. We're all familiar with this, right? The iceberg. Everyone uses it in our field. What I really was attracted to in this particular slide, photo, is that if you can notice, and please focus on that, what's underneath is completely different, right? Completely different than the top. This is what I'm curious about. What's happening underneath? Not just, I was told to probe in, into the underneath and understand it, but I clearly see that it's very different. So a few things inspired me pursuing how we can go about exploring and revealing the implicit. So one thing is that everything in our lives is incomplete, right? What we notice or see is incomplete. We complete the picture, right? Nothing that we see externally tell us the whole story. Interveners and parties too do not know or understand everything. But it doesn't end there. Implicit. The most fundamental message of psychology is that most of what's going on in our head, we have no access to. We have little idea of what drives our behavior, our needs, our goals, motivations, and underlying issues, in our case as conflict resolvers or conflict engagers, underlying issues and goals fueling the conflict. And many parties in my research and other research, and not only parties, mediators and negotiators, say they want to address it. They do say that. Do they do it? Rarely. And that's what increases my curiosity. Also, something really important to remember is that goals and issues, it's not just to reveal, because they keep changing like life. everything keeps changing and evolving, and we can't catch it. Let's just ask the parties what they want. Some approaches to mediation tell us to do that. We'll ask them and they'll tell us, because everything is within. But what if they are unaware of their goals? So how do they evolve? They evolve through the relationships, the interaction. We are relational creatures. We are not isolated, bounded as we think. We always incomplete in the process of becoming. In addition to that, another factor that I would like to consider is perception. Although we are unaware of so many things, perception profoundly shapes our decision. And another thing that it's important to take into consideration and consider reflective practice, everything is automatic. 95% of our decisions are driven by system 1, which is fast, associative, intuitive, emotional, and automatic. This is especially true in interventions where things run very quickly, parties are emotional, they feel threatened, and everything goes so fast. So in this kind of uncertain situation, we react automatically. So where does our attention go to in such situations? It goes to what's explicit. If the parties tell us something, we go with it, right? We go to what is salient. We go to the substantive issues and to the positions. And not necessarily those things that they tell us are the most important. And again, many people in our field want to explore all the other stuff, but for some reason, we don't do it very often. Something is covering my, okay. So since we know more than what is, that we know that there's something inside underneath, we need tools to explore what's underneath, right? To identify the purpose and the goals, and to change the trajectory of this destructive interaction. Doesn't move, sorry. Oh, here we go. So how can we help to see the implicit? Because I was in one of the presentations here and somebody said, that's it, we just don't know, nothing to do, we just have to recognize it. I disagree. I think we can do many things. So I think my perspective is reflected in this. One cannot see what they haven't noticed yet, and cannot notice what they did not see, right? So to see more and get better in what we do, we need to see more and to be prepared to address the implicit components of any situation. So what happened with me when I was a graduate doctoral student, I wanted to research, how can we reflect? How can we improve our practice? Unfortunately, I couldn't find much research about the effectiveness of reflective practice. So I went to other fields. I went to skills acquisition, to learning, to expertise, to decision-making, cognitive processing, management, reviewed some research that was done about reflective practice in medicine, management, education, and expertise. And my reflective models are built on this knowledge. So I'm not going to go, as I said before, into all the research, but in medicine, since 2007, there's Mamde and her colleagues in the Netherlands. They research the accuracy of diagnosis, and the speed of decision-making. And as you can see, there are 3 conditions in most cases that they investigate, they research. I'll just say very briefly that the deliberate reflection condition is usually to write down the first diagnosis. It's very, very systematic and detailed. Then systematically list findings from the case that speak for the diagnosis, against the diagnosis, then that they were absent in the case, but would be expected if the diagnosis was true, then consider an alternative diagnosis and go over all the steps, 1, 2, 3, very, very precise. And what they found out is that the reflective practice condition consistently improves physicians' clinical problem solving, diagnosis, diagnostic learning, and providing the opportunity to assess findings systematically. They reduce clinicians' errors, they overcome the influence of salient, destructive features and disruption caused by somebody call them or something, or by overly emotional patient or aggressive or any bias. It helps students solve diagnostic problems, and it facilitates the understanding of new information about diseases. And they keep finding this over and over again. So apparently, living in a cave doesn't make one geologist. Experience is not enough. Experts, in contrast to novices, show superior performance on representative tasks from their domain. Many professionals accumulate decades of experience without increasing their performance. And we are talking about studies about in education, in teachers, nursing, doctors, physiotherapists. And this is important. Executing behavior proficiently without an intention to improve, I think I mentioned it before, may not lead to further improvement in performance. Improvements depend on deliberate efforts, meaning reflective practice. It's called in different names, but in order to change our performance, we have to focus specifically on particular aspects. It's very important. So those who keep improving, this is the finding for decades, engage in 1, purposeful practice in a safe training environment where they practice specific aspects with supervision or guidance. They create opportunities for reflection, problem solving, and repetition, and with feedback. So this is like the basic of what I am doing in my reflective frameworks. So reflective practice in medicine leads to competent diagnosis and improved quality of automatic decision-making. I'll explain that later too, because it is important, right? Because I said before that we use mostly system 1, so how can it help if we engage in reflective practice, which is actually system 2? Which is more deliberate and slow. Now, I have to say that this research is in the works, so the mechanism behind the effects of reflective practice remain unclear, and it needs further research. But the tentative explanation is the activation and reorganization of prior knowledge induced by system 2 reflective practice. So the assumption is that reflective practice expands and restructures the mind, develops complex schema or mental representations. and expert performance requires to do that very effortful attempts and continuous attempts. So that leads to our approach, which is exactly, it is based on that. Our reflective practice, we ask you what you do when you reflect or engage in reflective practice. Our approach is purposeful. It is in the context of our goals. We don't just wonder. We have to define our goal, identify our goals, and be very purposeful in our reflection. Now, we focus on what we are not good at so that we can increase our performance. And this process generates continuous learning and improvement through probing our experiences in a structured way and in a systematic way. So it liberates us from preconceived beliefs or biases that standing in the way of attending our goals and the party's goals that are hidden most of the time. So through this cognitive structured systemic efforts, we create new mental representations and new brain circuits. The SRI specifically does that. It's a framework for reflecting on specific aspects, underlying behaviors, and helps to integrate new insights into practice, back to practice. And it's done by engaging again cognitively and building the new, more complex cognitive structures. So again, you see that there is an interplay between system 1 and system 2 in order to change our automatic behavior and also control more our automatic behavior. So I'm moving now to the SRI very, very quickly, just to show you how specific we are when we are talking about this specific framework. So most of us in our profession, we focus on substantive. Everyone knows what it is. It's what the parties say they want. It's tangible, it's explicit, very easy to talk about. Underneath it, in this jar, there are identity issues, relational issues, and process issues we are all concerned about, right? Process is about what communication would work the best. People are not satisfied many times with how people engaged them or didn't take them into account, wasn't equal enough. We all are now very concerned about equality and equity, and this, of course, it falls here. Who am I in the situation? In our Western individualist culture, we are all concerned how we see ourselves and other people see us, and we'll do everything to make sure we are being seen positively. And the relational is who we are to one another, whether we respect one another, how we are being treated by others. And if we are engaged in this kind of implicit concerns, it's very hard to get to the substantive. I'm sure all of us as interveners, we know that it's really, really hard. So identity and relational issues are the drivers of conflicts. This is what actually parties are concerned about the trust, the treatment, the communication, and it's really hard to identify. Most of the times it remains unspoken. I'll just say that the instrument, it's 4x4x4. It's done in a very structured, safe environment, and systematic and shared in a group. It has 4 dimensions: the substantive, process, identity, and relational. We have 4 questions for each dimension. And each dimension is analyzed by 4 other questions. So shared, safe, systematic, and structured, we actually get out those implicit issues up to the air. And, you know, in life, some issues don't have process, some don't have relational. They change all the time. I mean, we see a situation, we analyze it, and then tomorrow it's a different thing. I had 2 examples here, but I won't go into it. But as you can see in these 2 situations, salary raise and mediation center, each one see it differently. You see, the directors see it in one way, the volunteers see the same situation in a different way, and so on and so forth. So this tool actually captures complexity and simplicity, and it generates this interplay between conscious and unconscious system 1 and system 2, which is necessary. It's actually like any skills, when we acquire any skill, like riding a bike, we start with something that is explicit. We have the rules and how to do it, and then it becomes automatic. So the benefits of it is that we gain control over our performance more, not 100%, but what's more important, in my opinion, is that the quality of our automatic associative decision is better. It's improving all the time, because the first one, it relies on simple mental representations and schema, and the other one, the mature automatic reaction, relies on complex schema and mental representations. Let me see if I want to say anything more. You know, it's structured, I said. It addresses, actually, by probing into these 3 dimensions in addition to substantive, I think we address our overarching goal, as I see it, to offer parties a container to identify underlying issues and engage in intentional, purposeful, and meaningful conversation. So it promotes them in the way that their decisions are more informative, and they can progress toward more optimal outcomes. Again, changing habits. And by the way, when we first use it, it's very unnatural and artificial, because we are not used to dig into those issues and talk about them. Michael, this is just the structure of our groups. I'll just show you them because I want to leave time for conversation. But you can see here, and you'll see in the PowerPoint that you'll get, all the components in our training, and how our groups are built up, and what's like the outline, like typical outline. We actually encourage inner dialogue and outer dialogue, right? If I am not coherent in what I'm saying to you now, if it's not clear to me, it will come across as not clear, right? So like, it's a very basic principle that we have to work on both of them. There is dialogue between the inner and outer dialogue. Michael?
Yeah, can you go back to the previous slide for 1 second, please,
Sure.
Tzofnat?
Here you go.
One of the things, and we'll talk about this, or be happy to answer any questions during the Q&A. But Tzofnat and I are running a course currently, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the course that includes reflective practice and the structured reflective instrument. And what's shown on this slide has a great deal to do with how that course is structured. So we'll talk about that when we get to finish our presentation and during the Q&A and comments. Okay.
Michael.
Thanks. So although reflective practice can be done individually, and we can have a long conversation about that, I have developed instruments, and and have ways of helping people do reflective practice on their own, the best way to use it and the best way to learn is in a shared setting, which we call reflective practice groups. And in our groups, we make use of the practitioner's knowledge. In other words, as somebody presents a dilemma, we're relying on them to be thinking it through. Our questions are prompts. They promote, they stimulate, they inspire thinking, but the thinking comes from within rather than answers coming from outside. And that's what leads to self-discovery. It's interesting, most of our work, and today is a classic example of that. So much of the training that we do, that we attend, is a collective learning, necessarily so. But in our work in reflective practice groups, there is the opportunity for individualized learning. Each person has a chance to present a practice dilemma. The group shares in that by asking questions. And what ends up happening is, as the next point mentions, that group members not only participate, but they gain their own insights that have to do with their own practice experiences. And as I said before, it's a non-judgmental approach. We do not generally offer advice, recommendations, suggestions. In fact, one of the experiences that Tzofnat and I had yesterday with teaching the class was that this was our first class, and the first question from one of the participants was actually a statement framed as a question. Don't you think you should have considered, or why wouldn't you consider? And one of the things that we do is help the group members learn how to shape that idea, because the idea was a really good one that the person had, and it was a question of helping them shape it into the form of a question. Okay, thanks, Tzofnat.
Yeah, so we'll just finish with testimonials that what people really like about this experience is to make, it helps them to make the implicit explicit. You know, we always afraid, you know, we run this tension between psychotherapists and mediators. So I think some people find it very helpful to have a clear cut what it means, what we need to do, what is the role of the mediator always comes up in our sessions from different perspectives, and also help people to address questions like what I must to attend and when, now, later, in what format, how to, like, more tools, how to surface those dynamics, and consider aspects that they didn't consider before, that were overlooked, and respond more fully, you know, to all the aspects of the interactions in a complex situation. So I think we are done with our PowerPoint and we are ready for a conversation. You have here our emails, and I think Nikki also put it in the chat, right?
Yes.
And yeah, as Michael said, there is a course that started yesterday. A few people could not make it because of different reasons. So there are a few spots, we recorded it. So if somebody wants to join us, you can still do that. We have a few spots, and we'll compensate whoever joins now. Will compensate you for the time you missed, and you have the recording. Michael, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, it's 7 sessions altogether, 7 monthly sessions of 2 hours each. And you'll get, Nikki was kind enough to put the information up, but it's also on this slide. And you can read about the course, and you've got our information. You can contact us directly regarding the course. I want to just say one more thing. Well, no, I think I'll wait till the end. I would like, yeah, I do. Sorry, there's just so much, and I've been reading in between listening to Tzofnat, and it doesn't matter how many times I've heard her make this presentation, I learned something new and different every single time. So for me, it's important to pay attention, not just that she's my partner, my colleague, but there's something fascinating for me about it. I did happen to notice one thing that I want to start with, if that's all right with you, Tzofnat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I learn from you every day, every moment.
That's the great part. That's part of the spiral process of constant learning. So Harvey Newman put up the typical, what we know of as an established adult learning process, from conscious incompetence ultimately to unconscious competence. And absolutely that occurs. What happened is that as I was reading that, and especially if you look at the illustrations that tend to accompany it, it's either a ladder or a stair step. And I thought, what the hell happens when you get to the top step? You know, where do you go? Do you go off? What happens you get to the top rung of the ladder? Something has to happen after that. And that's where the idea about the spiral came in. And that is that it's a process of constantly going back through this same four-step process. There's a wonderful book called Zen, the Beginner's Mind, that speaks about this. I was giving a talk to a class, actually. It was one of a class, and describing the spiral process. And a student said, I have an example for you. I said, great. And she said, so my husband is an expert in martial arts. She said, what do you think happens when you get to 10th degree black belt, which, if my recollection is correct, is the ultimate? And I and the other 15, 18 people in the class were going, oh, no, I'm not sure what happens. None of us were martial arts experts. And we asked her the answer, and she said, they go back to the beginning. Now, obviously, they don't go back to the beginning and forget everything that they have learned. It's about beginner's mind. It's about being open in the same way that a beginner was open and being unconsciously incompetent at the beginning. We put ourselves back in that place to be surprised, to be open to the possibility that despite our, going back to what Tzofnat said earlier, despite our expertise, there is always something more to learn. So by placing ourselves in the position of beginner's mind, we actually learn over and over, and we follow that process. It doesn't just follow a stair step. It is a constant spiral that expands and increases. Mr. Newman, thank you for posting that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to share. I didn't share, right? I think I did it privately, but we were going to practice an exercise inspired by the SRI. So I'm going to put it in the chat, and you can do that later or with a friend or a colleague. Okay, let me just make sure everyone gets it. So it's going to be here. It's only it's one question of one aspect of the SRI, and it's not exactly the question. We just adjusted it to this session. Usually we do some individual work, and then we do breakout rooms, and then we do plenary. So you are welcome to use it maybe with whoever you feel comfortable with.
It's like a taster, a teaser,
Yeah.
in a way, for an instrument that looks surprisingly simple. And in fact, it's not difficult to understand, but it is remarkably sophisticated. and produces extraordinary results when it's used.
Yeah, so we would like to open, I saw a few questions, but Nikki, do you want to help us with questions people
Yeah,
have?
let's open the floor officially to your questions. Thank you so much. I think probably as does everybody else, there are a million questions, and I think that was reflected already in some of the comments. And I actually liked what you said about reframing or helping the person in your course to reframe their statement as a question. I think we might turn our eye to that as well. Oh, and they've been coming in. One of the questions, which Michael, you addressed a little bit, was the difference between reflection in action and reflection on action. I was wondering if either or both of you could dig into the difference between that a little bit and tie it into the comment about how the reflection how these different kinds and moments of reflection benefit both the mediator or the person leading the process and the potential clients who are part of the process.
Sure. I saw something, Tzofnat, in the chat, and I responded briefly to it. So do you want me to, let me just carry on a little bit and then you add and embellish on, build on that? Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. So what we have been talking about and what the SRI does is actually, first of all, we're focused on what happens after an event. So Donald Schoen referred to it, and I've just continued to use his framing, which is reflection on action. It's looking back, it's retrospective. And in the same way, the SRI, and Tzofnat will talk more about that, is retrospective. But the purpose of being retrospective is then to build capacity in two ways. One, you build capacity because you're developing your skills, you're developing your confidence. You're also increasing your ability to work much more rapidly and effectively in the moment, because things happen in any of our interventions. And by the way, the work that Tzofnat and I are doing, both independently and together, apply across disciplines. It doesn't matter whether you're a mediator, you're an arbitrator, you're a facilitator, you're an organizational consultant. It doesn't matter to us. We work with people who come from the transformative approach, the narrative approach, facilitative, directive. We're not teaching people to do their work differently. They don't have to learn new skills. We take people as they are and say, what we want to do, if you come to us and you say, all right, I think of myself as working in the transformative model. Good. We want to help you be the best that you can possibly be within that model. Ours is not to question whether that model is a good idea or a bad idea or appropriate in one circumstance or another. So we're looking after the fact, but as we become familiar with, and Tzofnat alluded to the idea that once you first start any project, any activity, there's going to be a period of awkwardness and unfamiliarity. But as you learn how to do the reflective process, you can actually do it in the moment. And the example I often use is learning to ride a bicycle or learning to drive an automobile. We're very, very self-conscious and unsteady and uncertain at the beginning, and then it becomes kind of effortless. It's seamless. It isn't that we're not paying attention, but it becomes automatic in a way. And so reflection in action, which is what happens moment to moment, can also occur. You just have to build your capacity to do it. And in response to the question, I also said that this is how I work with my clients. It's not only what's going on in my own mind. I share some of that with the clients, and I invite them to reflect and share with me as a way of building an increasing understanding of what their explicit and implicit goals are, what their needs are, what their expectations are, and so on. Because the better we work together, the more likely it is that the outcome that they achieve is one that's satisfactory to them. I'll be quiet for a while, so I don't want to dominate.
I see many questions here. Nikki, do you want to organize it so that I want to be fair to people?
There is no fairness. No, I think whatever you do is inherently fair. There was a kind of a stream of discussion going on about the role of subjective versus analytical. I don't know if you want to touch on that. And then I think actually Maria had a great overarching question, which I think would be really interesting to everybody about how you distinguish reflective practice from what others might call a support group. I'm not sure if you want to engage with the subjective or kind of leave that to the threads of the chat.
Michael, do you want to respond to Maria? Which question should I address first?
Let's do how you would distinguish RP from what others might call a support group, because I think that's a broader based question, and we might be able to dig deeper.
To me, it seems like it depends what you do in a support group, right? If it's people gather together, and I don't have much experience, I'm not a facilitator of supportive groups, but I'm just assuming, Maria, maybe you can help me, and everyone talks about whatever they want. It's not structured, it's not goal-oriented, it's not systematic, it's not trying to improve how you hold the tennis bat in a certain angle, like this is very particular to tennis, but this is what we do in mediation too. So if it's not like that, then it's not the reflective practice to improve performance as I see it. So it depends. So I assume that some support groups do use very structured format. Could be. I don't know.
I've just to build on that and add to it, Tzofnat. So I actually co-led a group with a colleague, and it was not Tzofnat, but someone else, and the idea was to see about our very different approaches. And oh my goodness, it was so obvious. And so here's what would happen. So in this practitioner, because who it is unimportant, but in that style, a person said, I've got a practice dilemma. Here's what it is. There was some clarification questions about what the dilemma really was. And then they went around the circle, and every single person offered a solution to the dilemma. Case consultation is how it was built. In our group, the first part happens. Somebody presents a dilemma. We do a bit of clarifying of what the issue really is for the person, get a little bit of information about the context as much as we need, and then we start asking questions. We start asking questions to help that person discover the answer for themselves. We don't give them the solutions. So many of the groups that call themselves reflective practice groups are really more like case consultation groups. And, I'm not going to get into ever judging what's right for somebody or what's best or that, but it is a really significant distinction between the two.
I see Harvey raising his hand.
Hi, Michael. First of all, I want to thank you for acknowledging my thing that I sent you, or everybody really. And I have a question about that. And by the way, I love the bicycle, and I use that all the time, the bicycle and the driving, because those ones I can really relate to. But it doesn't go from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence without going through stumbling blocks. And I'm just curious about what you do about those stumbling blocks, because each one has a specific type of stumbling block.
Say more about stumbling blocks.
I understand. Okay.
Do you want to respond to it? Because I want to know more about what you're thinking, Harvey.
Okay, so you start out with unconscious incompetence, and you can get easily frustrated. You can feel like a sense that it's never going to happen, and you can quit. And then you never get to unconscious unconscious competence. So that's one of the early stumbling blocks, but there are stumbling blocks along the way. Even after that, you get to conscious incompetence, and you can still feel like it's never going to happen, or you can start to beat up on yourself for not being so good at it.
Right.
So there are different stages in that process.
Yeah.
Do you want to go on, Michael, or?
Sure. So in the groups I work with, we have people who are relatively newly minted practitioners. And we like them to have a little bit of experience so that they can bring those experiences to the group. It isn't that they have to have 25 years of experience to participate. And we have, I do a group where the range of years of experience literally goes from a year to 30 years. And so people are all over the map in that respect. And what happens is that sometimes the answer to the question that the person poses is that they need to learn something, that they need to acquire a skill or acquire knowledge that they did not have. And that's what created the dilemma for them. They just didn't know what to do in that moment because they hadn't learned. So helping them identify that. And then the next question is, okay, you figured out you need to learn something. Let's talk about where you're going to get that knowledge. Where are you going to develop that skill? How can you do that? What will it look like? How will having that skill or knowledge help you from where you are right now, help you become a more effective and adept and resourceful practitioner? So it's possible to work with people at all of those various levels. I even have experienced practitioners who go back to the very beginning, and it's the process. I just have to tell you, it's so exquisite in what we can do, because it starts with the idea that we meet the person wherever they are, and we don't make assumptions. And so we want to one of the biggest challenges is helping the person identify the real question that they need an answer to for themselves, and then help them find that solution. So is it a challenge to work in those different sort of modalities? Absolutely it is. I wouldn't suggest otherwise. This is not something. Facilitating a group like ours is not something that you just walk into and say, well, I've led groups before, I can do this. It's not at all, because it involves really having a mindset and then sticking to it and being disciplined about the mindset, not about the specific questions or the order of things, but being rigorous about, I've called them the attributes of a reflective practitioner. And by the way, I noticed somebody added humility in there. And in my new book, I'm doing a second edition of my book, and the 10th attribute that I've added is humility. The very first, and these I think are kind of bookends that help us. The very first is curiosity, and that's one of the things that that I think is fundamental. I'm going to stop because, you know, I've written books about this. I could just keep going and going, and that's not fair. So please.
I do want to say that the SRI, which is goals oriented, can very much help people who have obstacles or situations they are unclear. Like we had a situation yesterday in our session that very bright mediator who's very concise but still had conflicting goals, and we had to clarify it, and it can be done more easily with the SRI, because you can identify what it relates to, and help you to make progress. If I understand your question correctly, as you meant. I mean, there's no correct.
May I go to a different question? Because it's a really interesting one. And well, for me anyway, and that is about an opening statement and whether how you sort of use can you use an opening statement in a way of engaging the parties in actively reflecting with you? And the answer is that's where it begins. It begins by establishing what the relationship is among you and what your role is. So I begin with all sorts of broad, open-ended questions. Yes, I talk about confidentiality like everybody else and any of the other obligatory items. But I ask them a lot about their choice to come to mediation. I ask them a lot about their how they process information, how they make decisions, how they work together, what are the sticking points for them. And also, very importantly, I say, and I mean it, because then I reinforce this repeatedly throughout, stop me at any time and ask me what I'm doing. I invite you to challenge, not to challenge me necessarily, but to be curious about what I'm doing. I want you to be fully engaged in all of this. So that sets up the possibility for engaging with them in a different way. And lots of people do this. I don't mean to suggest that I'm unique. I'm the speaker, so I'm giving my example.
There's a
Maria?
question, there's a question about whether the group can consist of individuals with different levels of experience, or do you try to cluster people based on years of experience or type of practice, etc.? Does it make a difference?
Doesn't make it. I mean, it obviously changes the dynamic of the human interaction within the group, but from my point of view as a group facilitator, makes no difference. It's a different kind, it just means that I attend to each person slightly differently. So we have a group that has, for example, somebody who is a community mediator, a couple of family mediators, several commercial mediators, somebody who does construction disputes, and we're all in the same group together. And people have so they operate from different perspectives. They have different years of experience. I think the group decides in some instances when we form them, if they want a homogeneous group, they want a certain level of experience, and fine, we'll work with that. Or they want only practitioners who do family work or only do commercial work. Fine, if that's what they want, absolutely. That's what we'll function with. And I see that we're almost out of time, and may I just say one last thing? This is really more of a shout out and a thank you. Because my colleague Susan and I have an extraordinary opportunity coming up to work with a group of family mediators in Ukraine. And we did a webinar for them, and they were excited about doing reflective practice. And we offered our to do the group just because it would be a contribution at, you know, no cost to them, to run it for 18 months. But there was a sticking point, and that is it required simultaneous translation. And the simultaneous translators charged a certain fee. And we were able to secure funding. We received notice last week from AAA NYC-DR. And I really want to thank the American Arbitration Association for that.
What a perfect way to bring closure to this amazing session. Thank you so much for sharing your work on reflective practice. We all benefited from your insights, your experience, and I look forward to, you know, some future work that the two of you are working on with all of our colleagues in the field. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Maria, thank
We
you.
are now going to turn off the recording. We have officially adjourned this morning's breakfast, and I understand that you may be able to stay for just a few minutes. We'll go no longer than 10:15 for anyone who would like to stay for some additional informal chat.
I unfortunately cannot. Tzofnat,
Okay.
can you stay?
I can stay a few minutes, yeah.
Unfortunately, I have my own grief group to attend.
Thank you so much, Michael and Tzofnat.
Thanks.
Any questions, thoughts, comments for a few minutes? Nadia, is that how you pronounce